Okay, thank you. Thank you so much again. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for the speaker for taking your time to discuss this interesting topic of battery second life, one of the hottest trends in the industry. So before we get started, I want to make a small note about Energy Innovation Network, the network bringing us together tonight or today, depending on the time zone. So we are a network of energy professionals. It was started 7 years ago in Silicon Valley, and it's a global nonprofit powered by volunteers from around the globe, the US, Europe, Asia, and Africa, with a growing presence of people working at the intersection of high-tech industry and energy industry. So the network organizes event series, conferences, and special events with the aim of bringing together. We've so far reached more than 3,000 people worldwide, which are professionals, experts, scholars, and business elites in the energy, environment, and transportation industries to build, with the aim of building a global network of and promoting energy education, innovation, and advancing a more sustainable future. So as I said, our events has been participated, brought together more than 5,000 people from more than 100 regions all around the globe. And our volunteer team comes from renewable energy industries and top-tier universities, including UC Berkeley, Total Energies, and WSP. This is our leadership team, our co-presidents and different team leads, and some of our volunteer team from around the globe, as we said. So we have also like a stellar advisory team of people working in administration position from China, the US, and in academia. So what do we do exactly? We organize summits, an annual Inspire Summit, which has been going on for 3 years. And we have a special education program, which everyone is welcome to join. We also organize events, study groups, and webinars like this one to bring industry professionals for networking, startup mixers, and distinguished speaker guests. We have many event partners. These are some of them, including Autonomy Digital, working on mobility events in Europe, and New Energy Nexus, popular for energy professionals, and renewable energy in Africa. So today's event will be about second life batteries. We'll be discussing opportunities and challenges, and we come to it later on. And this is the panel today, taking us through the discussion. You can reach us on our email displayed on the screen. There's our website as well, where you can get more information about our network. And there's a Slack channel, as I said, that we post a link for you to join to keep on with the discussion and keep up with our work and actively engaging with also our audience. So these are some of our past events. These are last year session in the Inspire Summit, talking about climate collaboration, how countries can come together to achieve net zero in a collaborative and different partnership from all over the globe. So we also had a session about finance, how to mobilize finance into climate, and sessions about adaptation and mitigation. So other parts events has been about energy efficiency, water, energy, food nexus in Africa, and also like the source of product management in renewable energy sector. So we also have discussions about mobility. This was one of the events in partnership with Autonomy Digital, discussing about mobility as a service and how considering like the barriers and opportunities around this business across geographies. So we have other special programs. As I said, there's workshops. One of them was discussing about biofuel standards, and also education programs powered by professors from UC Berkeley, professionals from Tesla, and Amegy Solar. So we get good feedback from people engaged with our programs and our education programs. These are some of them, and certificates are used of completion after the programs. So more information can be found on the website, and we also, of course, share with you the links and all the info you need to be able to participate in these programs later on. So that is it about EIN. So we can get started with the panel. Thank you all again for being here. And maybe to start, we all know that batteries are really driving this clean tech revolution. They are the center of many solutions to climate change, especially electric mobility and renewable energy. However, they remain expensive and they have like a very limited lifetime. A study by Bloomberg New Energy Finance reported an estimation of 26 gigawatt hour of batteries retired by 2025. And many players are coming together looking into how to best tap into the latent value of these batteries and to avoid the hazardous battery waste. This is especially because these batteries retain about 70 to 80% of the initial storage capacity at retirement. So we've recently seen some EV OEM partnering with battery companies to repurpose their batteries, and other players approaching it from a materials recycling angle, like Rejuve materials and some other companies in Europe. So with this panel, we wanted to focus on battery repurposing, and we'll be discussing the economic and technical challenges and prospects of battery second life ventures. So we have three panelists coming from the industry, and I would like to give them a few seconds to introduce themselves, introduce their companies, and then we kick it off from there. I'll get straight to the questions and the discussion. So starting from William, he's the first on my screen. Maybe you can have a few minutes to introduce yourself and the company.
Sure, I'm happy to start. And thank you very much for hosting. This is, I've been looking forward to this event for throughout the week, so it's nice to be here. I'm William. I'm the CEO and founder of Cling Systems, and we come about this industry between where batteries reach end of life and where that remaining value can be captured. We see that this value can be captured in many different ways, all the way from reusing the battery in the same type of system, all the way to material recycling. Personal background, mechanical engineer, mastering in energy technologies. Wrote my master thesis at Northvolt on their recycling department, focusing on collection of electric vehicle batteries and mapping out where they go at the end of life. Since then, I founded Cling, soon to be 2 years ago, and we're now a team of 7. And yeah, I'm very excited for this talk tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much, William. Thank you for being here with us. And we can give the floor to Zora from Rejuve. You can introduce yourself and the company.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Zora, the co-founder and CFO at Rejuve. Thank you so much for being here to talk more about Second Life batteries. And at Rejuve, our mission is to help maximize the value of electric vehicle batteries by streamlining its life cycle from cradle to cradle. And we seek to do this with our fast battery diagnostic platform that perform health checks in minutes without sacrificing accuracy. You may have heard about us, especially about Second Life, through our work with the CEC, where we are repurposing used electric vehicle batteries into a Second Life application. And we've also been blogging about our journey, so we talk about all the challenges that we faced so far, and we want to surface those conversations here today and just throughout our time on the project so that everybody can start to address them. A little bit about background of Rejuve. So we were actually founded because Steve, my co-founder, realized that without battery diagnostics, we would have a mountain of battery waste in our future. So Second Life is very near and dear to our heart, and which is why we named the company Rejuve, because it's energy again, and we really want to support reuse as much as we can. And so far, since 2017, when we were founded, we've raised over $5 million in non-dilutive grants from the US federal government, as well as the state of California.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And congrats for the fundraising.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we can give the floor to Kai for introduction as well.
Sure. Thanks, and hi everyone. Thank you for having me. So I'm Kai, electrical engineer by education, spent the last 13 years in battery research, so started pretty young with it. Did some battery tests at first. I did my PhD on the topic. I was a scholar at UCLA for one semester, spent some time with Bosch in Singapore, and was head of the largest research group on stationary battery systems in Europe for some time. And today I'm the CEO and co-founder of Acure Battery Intelligence. We do battery analytics. So whenever a battery is generating data, voltage, current, temperature, we take this data to make sense of it in terms of battery safety, battery performance, battery lifetime, which is crucial to any second life usage, to determine the value of a battery when it comes from first life to second life, to operate it safely in a second life. And we do that with software only. We've grown over the past 2 years to a team of about 42, and we're still hiring strongly. So if you're interested, get in touch with me, and super happy to be here today.
Yeah, thank you, Kai. Thank you all the panelists for blessing us with your presence. So let's get into it. So I would like to kick this discussion off by really trying to understand the current state of the battery waste and battery recycling. Really trying to get into like the battery supply chain, like these batteries retired from their primary or their first application. Who's buying them? Who's buying from who? And at what prices? Who's setting the prices, and on what basis? What are the standards? We are lucky to have William from Clean System, actually, like the company trying to disrupt this market place, like the battery repurposing marketplace with their very innovative platform. So William, if you could help us like paint a picture around these battery supply chain, especially retired batteries, and really get us understand like what's the current state and how's your platform and solution actually helping to advance this market.
Yeah, thanks for all of those questions. They're all very relevant. I'll try to dissect them. I'll miss some, and we can circle back to them later. I'll start from where Kling was founded and on what belief. So when I was at Northvolt, I looked into the end of life of electric vehicle batteries and trying to figure out how can we best get them to recycling. How can we scoop up all of the batteries in Europe and beyond to maximize recycling, so we can get the batteries back to being new batteries? So I researched all the car manufacturers and OEMs and shipping companies, and it ends up, so the big shift is that we have had batteries in smaller applications for a very long time, phones, power banks, but also portables and so on. And for the first time, we now see batteries coming back from very, very large battery systems. And batteries have followed their applications for to the end of life in their phones and so on. And we can see a trend that this continues even with the vehicles. So the battery stays within the vehicle, and then they are extracted from the vehicle where the vehicle reaches end of life. And we have seen a kind of natural migration of vehicles in Europe moving from west and to the east. They're sold, you sell your car as a second hand, and then eventually third hand, maybe fourth hand. And the vehicle ends up somewhere at a local scrapyard or car dismantler, car recycler, and they have their long-term bilateral contracts with their local recycler. So what happens is that this ecosystem of car dismantlers that take on scrap vehicles from workshops, they all of a sudden, for the first time, receive quite a large increase of an entirely new system that they kind of struggle to to first of all know how to safely handle, and then knowing what to do with them. And this is where I'm so excited to have two battery diagnostics people here, because that's kind of the key to unlock where they should go. So what happens today is that they take out the battery from the vehicle as safely as possible, but that's not really known exactly how that should be done sometimes. I think many can relate to not having like these assembly guides at hands. And then they figure out like what we have this piece of 500 kilos or 200 kilos, whatever, of battery system here. It might be very valuable, or it might have a large negative cost. No one knows. So historically, like electric waste and just waste as a resource has been a negative value. You pay to get rid of it. But now the car dismantlers in this industry where that is kind of that their bread and butter is to take in vehicles, take it apart, and sell the spare parts. So they sell everything they can take out of a vehicle. And now all of a sudden, the other side of this situation is they say, okay, pay us so we can take care of your waste that they usually get paid for. So there's a friction between recyclers who want to get paid to accept batteries, and dismantlers and workshops and insurance company who wants to get paid to give them away. So there's this friction. How do we find the balance where the batteries are actually seen as an asset? And there's a lot of different factors playing in here. It's, of course, the battery diagnostics. How much energy is there left in the specific battery? What's the state of health? What's the remaining useful life? How many cycles? How was it used? Was it ever overcharged, ever over discharged? Was it ever too hot or too cold? It's all this kind of ledger that you really want to understand and know, while kind of potentially giving it a second life. But then there's this all of the other kind of factors, such as how many of those batteries are out there and where are they? How many are like within proximity so they can go to the same system? What's the logistic costs? How do you determine the safety of this battery? How do we get the right packaging? Like deep diving into the packaging of batteries. That's a rabbit hole to not really fall too deep in if you don't want to. But what ends up is that what happens is that the batteries kind of get stuck halfway to recycling or to second life because it's this friction. So what we see is that many car dismantlers and workshops is that they clean out the backyard and they put up a shipping container, and then they, let's say, repurpose this shipping container to being a battery storage. So it has to be fixed to hold batteries. That's easily done, and then they can hold those batteries there for months or even years. And then the batteries have a shelf life, and they also at least have a kind of a trust issue. It's like, oh, that battery has been there for 18 months. It's probably not so good. We don't know. So we see a growing number of containers out there being filled with end-of-life EV batteries and other batteries that should go either to recycling, if they shouldn't be repurposed, or to second life, or be reused. But this determining kind of system, or just let's say the market, is lacking. I'm kind of biased here, so I believe it's an issue that has to be solved, and that's what we're doing at Cling, to kind of consolidate this market and then making the available data available to all players. Whatever data is needed. Sometimes it's enough with knowing the range or the mileage of the vehicle. because the buyer can take that risk, while other times the buyer has to know basically the entire life cycles of the battery, how it was used and so on. Yeah, I've been talking for a while, but I mean, I can continue. Prices, who's buying to who? Prices, it's very hard to determine a price of a battery. It's a negative cost for it. Has, you know, recycling is covered by a gate fee. You pay to recycle. It's the negative cost all the way up to that the battery actually competes with new batteries, because small players sometimes lack access to new batteries. You kind of have to be a Volkswagen to buy batteries from Northvolt. You cannot shop it online. So like second life batteries is also just a supply to smaller players out there who want to build battery systems. And then all of a sudden batteries compete, like end of life, like used batteries compete with new batteries. It can even be more expensive. So it's just a massive range of the value of end of life batteries. Yeah, I've been talking for a while now, so I'm just going to leave it short there, and then let's circle back to any specifics later.
Yeah, thank you, William. Yeah, that was a really dense packed question, and you really tried to approach it like from different angles. And you've highlighted something interesting, how waste and battery waste has been like a negative cost, which requires actually like being innovative on the battery repurposing efforts. And also you raised the issue of like importance of battery history. And this is something we come on later on. We are lucky to have like people who are actually like really working like deep in this, like battery analytics and battery performance tracking. And maybe we can follow on with Zola from Rejuve. Rejuve is really approaching like the battery repurposing efforts heads on, and you mentioned how much you've been refunded, but can you give us more insight on what exactly you do? Like, how is Rejuve advancing like reality of second life batteries, and what has been milestones of achievement so far?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So as William mentioned, the marketplace is quite fragmented. So even with a growing supply, it's unreliable, and we don't really have the infrastructure to collect these batteries either. But what we're here to do is actually provide transparency to the first question most buyers ask is, how healthy is the battery? Right now, the only way to really test it is to cycle the battery, which takes hours and specialized equipment and trained labor. So this information isn't really readily available. And as William also mentioned, recycling is expensive. So what we've been able to do is really shorten the test time from minutes, and in some cases even to seconds. And we were able to do a few case studies and compare this to cycling. And we even compared this, we try to mirror UL 1974, which is the only test standard for second life batteries. And we were able to still achieve accuracy within less than 5% benchmark of cycling. So being able to do that with a lower cost tool and some training can really help democratize the availability of battery data. The other thing that we are looking to do is reduce the overall cost to repurpose, because it's not just the test time. Well, you mentioned a ton of this. There's a lot of overhead costs associated with disassembly, shipping, warehousing, and handling. So if you were to ship a battery to a centralized facility for testing, have to remove it from the vehicle, disassemble it, that's a lot of added costs and time. That makes second life batteries more expensive. So what if you can actually bring a portable tester that Rejuve has to those specialized facilities, or even to a dealership where these batteries may be coming back? And with our next product, we're actually looking to scale up to be able to test the battery in vehicle. So before you even have to think about removing the battery, you can at least have a sense of if it's even worth removing from the vehicle for repurposing, if it can still stay in the vehicle, or if it really just should be recycled. The earlier you can really qualify the battery and the least amount of touch points are needed, that will make second life batteries much more economical. And in the work that was funded by the California Energy Commission, we've created over 1 megawatt hours of used EV batteries. And actually, in most cases, we didn't even have mileage information because we were so far away from the actual OEM or the people that actually use these vehicles. And we've actually worked with passenger vehicles, forklifts, trucks, and buses. And I mentioned before, we've seen consistent results in terms of the testing. And so I guess in addition to that, we're also now negotiating with the DOE with a new grant to actually help build out the ecosystem. In this case, we would actually have a marketplace for Second Life batteries, whereas Rejuve would provide health information and provide some of those insights. And we talk a bit more about that in a few of our blogs, which I mentioned earlier. Those are all available on our website.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the response. We're actually having a pattern here. Like William mentioned, like the importance of battery history, bringing the point of transparency on battery performance and how Rejuve is actually working on like making the battery testing process much shorter and so quick, and that's very impressive. Like usually battery test performance is like a cycling process for hours, like cell to cell or battery pack. So achieving those accuracy values in that short amount of time and seconds is really impressive. So congratulations for that. And since we're really talking about performance and battery health, we are lucky to have Kai, who's actually working on battery analytics. And now we have the question about how much can battery analytics provide like accurate battery performance and state of health estimations, and would that be enough to skip like the whole testing process? And how is that accurate from the pack level down to the cell level?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I would say we have some quite good data points on this question. So we're managing about 1 gigawatt hour of batteries worldwide at the moment, from e-mobility to stationary to ships to all different kinds of applications. And the beautiful thing is, every lithium-ion battery comes with a sensor, so it's already there. So these batteries are generating data every day, 24/7. And looking at this data in a structured way can give you so much information. This is really an almost infinite source of exciting things for battery nerds to dig into. And if we look at, questions like, which would be a good time to transfer a battery from a first life into a second life? Which value in euros, in US dollars, would the battery have at this point, or which application should it go to? Because the same battery could be very well suited for application A in a second life, but not so well for application B. And the data analytics that we do based on the operation data, from my perspective, can cover this whole thing, which is great because you need to make it as simple as possible and as scalable as possible. Yeah, and so we're basically doing that today.
Yeah, thank you so much for the response. Pretty impressive, the 1 gigawatt hour of batteries you're managing worldwide. And so Zola touched on it a little bit about the costs of battery testing. And now, if we actually go into the economics or the finance around this battery second life process, I would like to bring up the question of how competitive is the prices of battery repurposing processes now compared to new batteries, and is this really a profitable venture? And if not, like what should happen, or what should the prices be, and where are those reductions expected to come from? Is it going to be like on battery acquisition prices, maybe upfront battery prices become lower, so that makes more sense for second life batteries? Is it going to be for maybe skipping testing labor and packaging and insurance? Like, where should we accept discounts to actually have second life batteries being cost competitive against like new batteries?
Yeah, definitely a $1 million or maybe even $1 billion question one day. Right now, I would say that unfortunately, like even for new and used batteries, there's not technically a market rate, right? Like William mentioned earlier, like the rates that you get, you see quoted like on Bloomberg, like those are rates at scale. And so maybe Tesla or VW can achieve that, but if you're a relatively small a vendor, you might not even be allowed to buy from them. So second life batteries might be your only option. And then you also, just for everybody's education, you know, when these prices are being quoted, you need to know if that's at the cell or pack level, because that's also a huge difference. So really make sure you understand what price you're seeing and what's included in there. Aside from being hard to compare between new and used batteries because of the quantity, there's really no market rate for second life right now. It's really on a case-by-case basis. In the US, I think a lot of people use eBay. That's how we sourced some of our early batteries before we found some partners that we work with and that we trust a lot. And there's definitely the other thing that's not included in a lot of these prices, which I think should be, is the cost to recycle and properly dispose of these batteries. These are costs that, like, you know, you see as a consumer for like plastic bottles and cans and even like your laptops. So we really should be thinking about this for our vehicles as well. But going back to the question, from the CEC project, the way that we're addressing it is by setting a target based on installed costs. So I mentioned earlier, the challenge with new batteries is that you actually have to add cost to test them, potentially transporting it to a new facility, designing a new system, potentially even disassembling. And unfortunately, I like to joke that unlike new batteries, used batteries are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So you have to take a sample out of each of them. Fortunately, we can make that sample as quick as a bite versus a few hours to test each one. But if you think about it, in terms of the balance of systems, you really don't want to try to cut on costs there, such as like the racks, cabinets, HVAC, thermal management, fire suppression. All those costs really should be the same. And then, so where can you find cost reductions? So the way that we're approaching it is to use as much of the original battery pack as possible. A big one is to be able to use the battery management system. There is a lot of friction in there, because if, let's say, VW or Ford wants to repurpose their batteries, but they don't have control how it's being handled in the second life, and they don't know that third party, they might have sensitivities in terms of like, well, our BMS is proprietary to us. So how do we start to think about bridging that gap so that there is some information that is shared, which can actually help reduce the amount of testing that's required. Also, for automotive batteries, they are subject to a lot of testing and standards before they go into the vehicle. There's a lot of questions on, can we leverage those same tests as proof to help also reduce the time to qualify? So I think there is some testing involved, but there could potentially be benefits of these being used batteries that they were previously qualified for a more stringent application, that perhaps we can then remove those barriers, and then that's a way we can start to find cost savings for used batteries and really enable the circular economy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. That's an interesting take on the battery second life market. And another question that comes up very often is the question of safety and degradation in second life uses. So if I could bring on Kai again, like from a data analytics point of view, or battery optimization processes, would you say second life batteries will be expected to age faster? And would that be like any safety hazards using them in this second life uses? And also, does that depend on the repurposing method? This is from that some players decide to use like a battery pack as it is, or battery modules as they are, and others decide to pull apart like the battery pack, test each individual cell, and do a whole new optimized battery configuration. So is there any difference in safety depending on these two methods, and how can battery analytics help to optimize like usage and avoid any safety hazards in second life uses?
Good question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as a scientist, there's one answer, and I also want to be diplomatic. So please listen to the full answer.
We can take both.
Batteries increase aging rate and lose safety over time. So a battery that's 6 years old is generally less safe than a new one, and it's aging quicker than a new one. That being said, somewhat less safe doesn't mean unsafe, right? So there's no reason to freak out when thinking about second life batteries. It's just you are operating a system that's more complex because batteries, as they age, the spread in parameters grows. So two batteries that might be identical at day one, and then you operate them in the exact same use case. After 5 years, they will not be the same anymore. So, just imagine identical twins. They're not going to end up the same person when they're 15, right? So, and it's the same with batteries. And so orchestrating or managing a system that is relatively similar to each other is easier. So second life poses some additional challenges. Can we manage these challenges? Yes, but we should be aware of them. And I believe that we should be aware of these challenges. We need to implement ways to deal with them both in terms of safety and in terms of lifetime. Regarding the lifetime, we usually see for most lithium-ion batteries like a 3-part aging curve, where in the beginning something happens that can be very chaotic, and sometimes the capacity goes up for a whole 6 or 7 months because the formation processes have not really been fully finished. And then there's a relatively long linear aging curve. And then towards the end, you go towards an accelerated aging. And so when we talk about, you mentioned it in the beginning, batteries with 70 or 80% remaining capacity going out of their first life, it doesn't mean that 70 or 80% of the lifetime are still on this battery. 70 or 80% of capacity means they're like 2/3 plus minus through their life. And there might be some applications where you can stretch the last third out a lot because you're not cycling the battery as often, or you're keeping it in a state where that's very comfortable for the battery. But this is something we should be aware of, right? Where are we putting those batteries? And if we put them in an application that gives you 1 or 2 cycles every day, it's probably not gonna be a very good choice, because then you have all the overhead costs of bringing it into another application, and it breaks down after 4 months, right? So that wouldn't be a great choice. And these are all, the additional complexities that I mentioned that we should be aware of. But still, we have some amazing engineers working on these topics, some of them with me on the panel. And so I do believe that we have, all we need to do it, but it's not going to be very, very easy.
Good thing that you know where the challenges are, and we have, as you said, like good engineers actually addressing the challenges. So there's so much hope around that issue of safety. And maybe coming back a little bit on the economics of this whole second life battery supply chain, I would like to bring on William again to talk about if really having a clear battery end of use supply chain could help to decrease or reduce upfront cost of our batteries in the primary application. And this could be in a sense that if you know where your battery is going to land after retirement, maybe you can get paid off for bringing disposing your battery for a second life. So should we expect like cost discounts for batteries in their primary applications? And who would actually get those discounts? Would it be OEMs, or would it be like primary users of these batteries?
Before I forget, I'm going to start with an example to exemplify who earns what. There's quite a massive company called Cox who just this last year bought Spears New Technologies. And Spears is another player managing and testing and analyzing end-of-life batteries. And Cox is, they do a bunch of things. Their kind of yearly revenues are in the many billions. So they do many things, but what they do mostly is sell vehicles. And now when they enter an electric vehicle world, they want to buy a company that helps increasing the value of the end-of-life vehicles, so they can be sold, in secondhand. So to just increase the second-hand market of EVs, we want to increase the value of the vehicles, and as the battery can make up the like 70% of the value of a used vehicle, electric vehicle, we want it to be as high as possible. So it comes back that if you have knowledge about the state of health of the battery at the end of life, or kind of just when you want to sell your vehicle, you can sell it at a much higher price if you know the state of the battery. So it will definitely help end consumers, as owners of electric vehicles, to know just have better data of the batteries. Then talking about like the optimal end of life paths, yes, indeed, it will help the first life owners. But there's another example of insurance companies, and in Sweden here and in the Nordics, insurance companies have a very big say in the lifetime of batteries and vehicles. Like we trust the insurance companies with everything. We have an insurance for everything, and they take on the ownership of crashed vehicles and so on, and their business is basically selling more insurance or reducing costs the risks that they carry. So if they can sell the things that they insure in a second life, or just earn as much as possible by them, it's the insurance companies that will benefit from increasing end-of-life value of vehicles and batteries. So not really the end consumer. And then there are a bunch of smart business ways where OEMs can play, which is kind of pawns, take back systems. Hey, we take your battery back and you get a new one for X% off. I think many solutions will and should be viable and used, and there's of course not one system fits all here. So yeah, many can benefit, and in the Nordics it's a lot of insurance companies benefiting, and ideally it should go to the end user to leverage kind of the masses, so more can adopt sustainable transportation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Interesting to look at how much value second life batteries could bring, and who would actually be benefiting from those values. So we've started getting questions in the chat box. Thanks everyone who's putting questions. Let's have a quick round of other questions, maybe a 2-minute response for each question, and then we take on questions from the chat box. And if possible, maybe anyone posting a question can also mention who they are directing the question to, or who they are willing for to be the respondent to the question. So maybe going quickly, again, about battery analytics, bringing on Kai to discuss what insight do we get from battery analytics on the best practices and optimal usage in like primary application to optimize salvage quality or salvage value of second life batteries. And that could be like, maybe we recommend not to discharge batteries until this depth of discharge value, or maybe to operate the battery in this temperature or these current rates. Like, what could be the best practices to base the best salvage quality or salvage value of batteries? And would that mean any compromises in the primary application? And would those be worth it? Would the trade-off be worth it to optimize for second life and compromise on usage in the primary application?
That's a very interesting question. So I think there's two scenarios. There's some applications where second life doesn't really make sense, because the first life can basically be, the first life application can basically use the battery even if it's only at 80%. You know, for a lot of people, a private car that has only 150 miles of range, that's still a great car, right? And why should I take the most costly component out of a car that's still working and put a new one in? I think that doesn't really make sense. But then there's applications like a ship. If you have a ship that's taxiing across a river somewhere, if the battery range doesn't get you over the river, you gotta get it out, right? And so that's a very clear and I think easy to imagine use case where battery analytics would basically tell you, hey, in 3 months, in 6 months, in how many months, we need a replacement. We still want a little bit of buffer, you know, to not do it on the last day, but then we're gonna have the following battery available. And then, you know, a platform provider could put that battery on the market and say, hey, in 3 months, in 6 months, we have 5 megawatt hours of NMC at an SOC, some parameters of this and that, and then, you know, people can start buying it. I think that would be, you know, a pretty nice use case. Would it make sense to restrict the usage of a battery in the first life to optimize on the second life? Yes. We know that even relatively small changes in terms of depth of discharge, in terms of durations during high state of charges, have a massive impact on the overall life cycle of a battery. So unless there's a very good reason that you absolutely need those features in the first life, you should avoid them altogether. You know, whether you use the battery constantly in this application forever, or if you want to switch it. So by slightly reducing depth of discharge, reducing times at high state of charges, that's just a good investment. You lose a little bit of performance and you gain a lot of lifetime. So, and you know, battery analytics can basically help you decide how much you want to reduce the, you know, the extent of usage of this battery and what gain you can expect for it in return.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting take on force optimization and compromise setup. If I could bring on Zola again, you mentioned challenges around like supply chain right now, and reaching economies of scale that would make like the battery second life profitable. But maybe from your modeling or projections, are there applications more suitable for second life batteries, like more than others? And what does that mean for profitability, and how do you optimize that? And maybe a very related question about that, like a little bit similar to what Kai just answered to, like, would it be ever worth it retiring batteries prematurely from their primary application now from a profitability standpoint to optimize like revenues or returns in the second application?
Yeah, that's definitely a very interesting question, because if we're talking about repurposing, you have to think through the application. And the first thing I would like to say is there's still no one size fits all. So it's really a bit of matchmaking. So you have to think through, what was the battery designed for in its first life, and why did it have to retire? So in Kai's example, where like the ship couldn't make it across the river, it's not because the battery is bad, it's just like it can't make it across the river. So it might just be perfectly fine for maybe a smaller river. That's one example. But it could also be for a stationary application. And for an EV battery, range, just like for that ship example, maybe matters, and also power, because your car needs to be able to take you up a hill, get you appropriate acceleration to get on the highway. So in a second life application, anything less stressful, whether it's mobile or stationary, could also be a good candidate. So examples that we've heard people are proposing is to repurpose into a golf cart or an e-bike, where the top speed isn't as high, and also the general load that the battery is carrying isn't as heavy. In our project with the CEC, where we're actually pairing our battery with solar, and the goal is to provide resiliency for these commercial buildings. So if you're talking about resiliency for critical loads, you're not talking about a huge surge in power all of a sudden. It's more to provide long-lasting power over an extended period of time. So you're not overstressing the battery where it needs to work very hard. So in those instances, that's a very great application for second life. And personally, I believe that there's potential for almost every battery, unless it's truly unsafe or pretty much at the point where it should be recycled, for it to have a second life application, because we are seeing like a lot of people doing DIY projects, which is great. People are learning more about batteries, but maybe that project only needs to be around for 1 or 2 years. That is a great candidate maybe for a second life battery, because batteries are designed to last much longer than that. So maybe you can sell a much cheaper battery that's near end of life, and it could be fine for that use case, really depending what it is. Some of the other ones that I think are ideal and more profitable is where I mentioned earlier, you reduce the amount of touch points, the amount of transportation, and also to a certain extent have as much information from first life translated to second life. So in an ideal scenario, that might be within the same organization, because they might be more open to sharing that information because it feels less sensitive. So one instance we're seeing where I think there's a huge potential is in commercial fleet, specifically for charging. So when the vehicle does not get enough power and range from the battery, it can be removed and maybe be repurposed in a second life application where it supports the charging infrastructure. There's a lot of benefits here, because also, especially if we're talking about trucks or buses, they need a lot more power, and the grid just may not be able to support that, or it could be overly expensive. So in this situation, you're basically augmenting the existing infrastructure and actually charging a new battery with used ones. So truly a circular economy, in my opinion. And at the end of the day, there are hard costs. So being at the same location definitely helps reduce that risk. Other situations that I can think of is if the second life system maybe is really far in the middle of nowhere, maybe hard to get to. In that case, maybe you want to reduce the amount of trips that you go out somewhere. And maybe in the first life application, it has easier access to infrastructure. So I know that this is very high level, but I wanted to be able to have people take kind of nuggets that they can apply to their own situation, because it is case by case. So you really have to evaluate for yourself and really please share the learnings as we are doing here so that we can all learn together.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. And thank you for mentioning true circularity, a very interesting idea. And I see some questions already trying to hint on that, but like from a recycling angle. So maybe we get to that later on. So the last question to William before we look at the question from the chat box. And this is an interesting one to me. Also, like from like some of the what could be some of the impacts with having like a clear supply chain of retired batteries? It's curious to think of if this will mean any change on how we think of ownership of battery systems. We know a few companies trying to roll in like battery as a service for electric vehicles or for other stationary applications. So I wonder if actually having like a stable and functional battery second life ecosystem, if that means improvement, or if that will actually make a case for battery as a service more or less. Like, could you see it as a reality more or less of a reality?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you. When I saw this question a few days ago, it's been on my mind, and it's a really tricky question. What we see now is kind of big investment in trying to keep control of the battery for as long as possible, with battery swaps, with leasing out the battery while selling the vehicle, with take back systems and pawn systems, and it's a resource that everyone wants to get to, and different player wants to get different types of value out of used batteries. Some say we should recycle all the batteries because one could argue that there is, the recycling rate is several 100% because one old battery can be recycled and put into several more new batteries. While others say we have batteries, we should use them for as long as possible. And all the answers are valid. And so the question is really, where do batteries go? Where should which batteries go? And the more intelligence we can, integrate into this end of life stack, in my belief, it will continue to be local players that will deal at end of life. That's a hypothesis I have at the moment that will be that is currently being tested by OEMs going into vertically integrating into recycling, take-back systems, and so on. But I believe that there are two big powers, and they're almost philosophical. Should the producer have more producer responsibility and keep the batteries for their entire life cycle, closing their own loops? Like, should all companies have their own loop? Maybe that's not super efficient. Maybe it is. On the other hand, we believe that there is more of a market and transparency, and that there comes efficiency by everyone being allowed and given a ticket to participate in maximizing value out of whatever is available at the moment. I believe that more should be allowed to participate in the resource that is now being the kind of key technology for storing energy. Like before it, you can buy gas and you burn it. It's but now it's still there. You use it and you still have it. You kind of can eat the cake and still use it. And who controls that waste? I don't know. But I believe that if we are more that can participate, more value will be extracted in the end. If that's a clear answer to your question.
Yeah, thank you. You brought in another interesting point of what should be OEM's responsibility in ensuring circularity of their batteries. So that's a really nice take, and that's something we can reflect on later on. Now we have time for questions from the chat box, and we go through them as they came. And for questions that didn't mention, like the respondent, like any one of you can take them on, and also you can mention which one you want to address. So the first question from Lucas was addressed to Dr. Kai, and he's asking that you recently announced a partnership with Dr. Dubarry, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. What can we expect in terms of battery diagnosis research with Acure?
Thank you for this question. Yeah, Mathieu Dubarry is one of the researchers that I've looked up to a lot when I was studying, when I was doing my PhD. He basically invented some of the methods that have become quite used in a wide field, and he invented it like 20 years ago. So he's one of the guys that lots of my colleagues quoted in their PhDs from. We're super happy that we could that he was interested enough about what we do to start working with us on a multi-year research project. Mathieu's work really focuses on using operational data, basically using external data like voltage, current, temperature to estimate or calculate internal processes of batteries, such as lithium plating, for example. And so we're basically implementing, or we're working together with Mathieu on implementing extremely powerful electrochemical analyses that can be executed on field data from batteries. Although we only started 3 or 4 months back, we've already implemented and scaled some of those approaches. It's incredibly exciting to see what's happening. We intend to publish also on the topic. We're still all researchers at heart, so you can expect that probably in a year or so there will be 1 or 2 publications on what we found. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, interesting. I'm already hyped for the publications coming from that partnership.
And in the meantime, you can really just read the old ones of Mathieu. They're still excellent. So exactly. Everyone, just Mathieu Dubarry, you find him on Google Scholar. Just good investment of your time.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas, for bringing up this core point. We're getting an extra bonus of readings from this session. So another question coming from Barsh is asking, one interesting example regarding energy storage could be examining the requirements for cold storage of processed crops. Can we use local installation to minimize the cooling requirement and then supply this with repurposed battery cells? This could go to someone maybe who looks at application side of battery repurposing. Like, what do you think of the idea of using them to cold storage and minimizing like cooling requirement to avoid food waste, I think, basically in this application?
Go ahead, Swar.
Yeah, thank you, Rian.
I'm trying to think. I don't know if I've actually evaluated an application like this. So is it possible? Potentially, but I think there's going to be a lot more questions that I would have to ask. Yeah, I mean, I think anything is possible as long as you can source the cells. And ideally, you would want to probably figure out what are your energy requirements and if that makes sense and if that's really the best use case. Because if you have other options that are more economical or viable, then you might want to consider that first. So sorry, I can't give a more specific answer to that very specific question.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Thank you, Bart, for the question. Yeah. William, you wanted to make a comment about this?
I think Sarah covered it all. It was a tricky question to answer.
Yeah. One thing I know about this kind of application is also because of a lot of social benefits it has, like there's many incentives or maybe subsidies like in different regions towards these applications. So for the financial modeling of this, like it can be profitable because of the incentive and subsidies you get. So it's region by region, and as you said, like it's an interesting use cases that you need to really look deeper into. So the following question from Vaibhav is asking about regulations on reuse of batteries and how they're expected to evolve over time. Anyone want to take this on?
I think I can go ahead and start.
Yeah, sure.
We all have different perspectives, just being in different geographies. Rejuve's in California, so obviously we have much more stringent standards than, like, let's say, the rest of the US, but we're still trailing behind like Europe and Asia, for instance. In terms of regulations on reuse, they're really, I think that's really the bigger challenge, is that there isn't any explicit regulation. So when you're talking about repurposing batteries, for instance, and actually we talk about this a little bit in our most recent blog, where we're talking about how do we determine where to place the batteries. When you choose a site for stationary storage, you actually have to know about like fire codes. And those fire codes don't necessarily, they're not specific to use batteries. So the big challenge is that it can be really up to the interpretation of the jurisdiction that you're working with. And you have to provide a lot of education. So I think, if anything else, the lack of regulation is probably causing the repurposing market to be even more disjointed, because you really don't know what's going to happen. And if you basically can't do an installation because of that type of technicality, then all the work that you've done can go to waste. So that's definitely something that, like, the California Air Resources Board, some of you may know CARB, I think they're working on a lot of regulations, and we've definitely submitted comments whenever we've seen anything that's relevant. But right now, like, we've seen very little that's specific to use battery, with the exception of UL 1974.
Yeah, UL 1974 is I would say the regulation. Who would say, sir? At the moment, it's the regulation to follow, or certification that you can get as a Second Life builder or repurposing company. It's very expensive to comply with UL, so that's on the one end. It's costly to comply. The other one is, without it is a lack of regulations for everything regarding Second Life. It's for storage, it's for transportation, it's for how to set them up and use them. So I would say, just a lack of regulations. You might imagine it should just draw people who do things, but it's DIY and it doesn't really scale. So those scalable missions to build the biggest Second Life, but we don't see huge, massive Second Life systems out there, even though we've been talking for many years. But it's because it's too risky to venture into a Second Life industry when there's no regulations. As Sora said, you can build a system, invest a lot of money into it, and then you kind of fall just because of future regulations. So it's hard to pitch a Second Life system to investors when they ask you when is the regulations coming, and you say, well, yeah, sometime in the future. And we've been, the new battery regulation here in the US, in Europe, it came out in December 2020. It was supposed to be implemented now in 1st January 2022. It's a very long roadmap for the implementation of the last, points. It's in the mid 2030s. And I guess you said it's trailing behind, but I guess US is also working on a new set of regulations. This is a question for you. Do you know if that's including Second Life, or if it's kind of excluded?
I'm unsure about that, but I know that in California, we have a lot of incentive programs, and we have surfaced that these incentive programs should also include used batteries, so as to help reduce the financial barrier, and also to encourage people to do that, so that it's supported. Because I think in some cases it was, I don't want to say it's actively excluded, but it was not included, and I think it was by accident. So definitely, if we're not regulations might be harder to pass. At the very least, we should at least support incentives and maybe at least provide some support or give more leeway, I think, for demonstration projects so that we can at least test it out, see more, learn, and then decide what regulations make sense. Because at the same time, I don't want regulations just to be passed based on fear and not having anything there, and which can really clamp down on the feasibility of some of these projects too, because we just don't know enough yet.
Yeah, thank you. That's a nice insight on regulation side of thing. And there was a question down about 1974 certification. So you also kind of addressed that. The following question is about also like application, like if any application is preferable, profitable, feasible, and we kind of touched that, and maybe we can combine it with the two following questions, which are both about recycling. Someone is asking what happens to, that's Scarlett asking what happens to the batteries that can be repurposed if they go in landfill or go through component recycling. And Carrie also asking about the recycling process and how sustainable is the process, and how much percentage of battery material we can get from the recycling process. If anyone wants to take on this, which is kind of beyond Second Life, but it goes into materials recycling, but maybe if you kind of touched it or addressed it in some ways, we can give a quick comment.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's
thank you.
CLING stands for recycling. I'm passionate about recycling, and the trickiest part of this question is like, how do you define recycling? What is recycling? Like, is it reuse? Is it can go all the way to reuse into, you know, separating all the pure metals that can be used in any case. But let's take the ideal state where you actually have cells and you shred them. You extract something called a black mass. It's just a powder. Usually it's just a mix of the cathode and anode materials mostly, and other kind of valuable stuff in there. And then you put that into, ideally, something called hydrometallurgy. And there you can get quite high recycling rates. You can reach, some mention, you know, up to 99%. But it's between this black mass and the materials that they separate out of it. Going from a system to these, you know, raw materials that can be used again. It's a lot of different things that happens on the way. And then you have reality playing in. You're not in a lab where you can say that you can extract 99% of raw materials out of a black mass that you produced for this, you know, for the purpose of recycling it. So what happens, just let's go through the steps. You get a battery. You probably want to discharge it to zero, like 0 volts. You kind of want to short circuit it. Then ideally not disassemble it because it takes time, but you maybe want to disassemble it down to modules. And then you have a big crusher, crush it, and then you separate out the plastics. You want to evaporate the electrolyte. You want to have a nice black mass that is like highly valuable. And this is a hazardous waste that is very tricky to regulate because it depends on what's in there, and then you have to know what's in there, and that is based on upstream processes, like what batteries goes into the process. And as you all know, there is a bunch of different chemistries in different cells, and we don't really sometimes know which chemistries are in which cells because just lack of transparency or labeling actually. So recycling is basically just sorting on different kind of detailed levels. But what's happening, the movement right now is going from pyrometallurgy, which is, you know, also recycling, but it also means burning. And then you scrap out kind of what's left and you can use it for other purposes, such as, you know, ceramics, paint, colors, concrete, and so on. That's also recycling. But moving from that to actually a wet-based process that is hydrometallurgy, gives you high recovery rates. And then the next step, perhaps, if it's feasible, is direct recycling, where you can actually just open up the cells, scrape up the different types of materials, treat those different materials, and so you don't have to take everything down to the raw materials and then build everything up again. Yeah, that's as far as I want to go at the moment, but many different ways and ways to recycle.
Yeah. Thank you so much for you just gave us a crash course on recycling. It's really an interesting also like topic, a bit tangential to what we're discussing now, but also like super interesting. Maybe we can have a follow-up or discussion on this, especially questions like, does it actually make sense to recycle the materials, and how cost competitive are they to actually mine new components, and also like looking into the whole environmental impacts and like ethical mining and everything. So that's a discussion should definitely have at some point. So let me bring on Kai like for the following question from Gia, asking like in an ideal world, how would like a new battery experience the product, service, and like he's asking to the 3 panel companies like across its first and second life. I'm not sure if the question is clear to everyone, but like the second component is asking, where would Acure clean system and Rejuve cooperate or coexist in an ideal ecosystem? Kai, if you would like to make a comment about this one.
Sure. So we're basically coming in once the cell starts operating. We're based on the BMS that's already installed. And then we gather the data through the operation in the first life to make sure that the battery is working safely, efficiently, and to have it checked. And then if, that's always the question of who owns the data and who has access to the data. But in an ideal world, this would give us the state of the battery at any given time. That from that you can calculate which second life application might be best, and then you accompany that battery into the second life to make sure it's still being operated safe and efficiently in that regard. Of course, you don't always have access to data from the first life and from the second life. And with that, I can hand it over to Zora, who's basically, in between, like, what if you don't have data from the first life? You still need to make a decision.
Yeah, and in our case, most of the time we had very little data. In the rare time that we've sourced from the OEM, even then they said, like, I think this information exists somewhere, but it might take me a really long time to get to it. So it doesn't make sense. So I think like first, I would encourage like any OEM that wants to reuse their batteries to provide much better tracking so that they can either share this information with a third party or make it available via the BMS. What can you do? Really, I think you can do cycling and you can do it multiple times. You can do UL 1974, or you can definitely reach out to me and we can talk about how Rejuve can help. I mentioned before, we do fast battery diagnostics. So we actually leverage a technique. So some of you may be familiar with this if you do battery characterization. It's electrochemical impedance spectroscopy. You can call it EIS for short since it is a mouthful. Essentially, it is a fast and non-invasive test, and it is seen as the standard to characterize batteries. That's essentially what we've been doing. And then we just need about, for Rejuve, our system takes about 30 to 50 samples for us to be able to get within 3% accuracy of cycling. So that is one option right now. There's very few other options out there. You can look at statistical models, but obviously that won't tell you exactly that battery that is in front of you or that you want to repurpose may be a good candidate because like Kai said before, like even identical twin batteries are not going to end up the same. So it is important to understand and analyze, and to the extent that you can access some historical information, something about the uses, even how it was stored before, once it's been removed from the vehicle is helpful too, because I think there was an example earlier where there's warehouses and containers full of these batteries. What was the temperature? Because calendar aging, while can be minimal, if it was subject to extreme heat or cold, can really have a severe impact on how healthy these batteries are as well. So not only just the first life, but maybe the tween years before it can even get into the second life.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I like the handover. The question was about the coexistence and the synergy showing on the panel already. So thank you, both of you. The second question is about OEMs, like any improvement in like battery cell manufacturing for to make them more compliant to second life in terms of cell selection also. And maybe if you can combine this with the question about SOH, like your view on like state of health, like if it is a universal definition, as it is sometimes it is only focusing remaining capacity and how much remaining charge or discharge power waiting. So if anyone wants to comment on both two questions, and we see how many more questions you can take on before we end.
I could start because it's an interesting question from the angle it's coming from. What can they do to be more compliant with second life? The reality, if we look at the developments we've seen in EVs over the past 5 years, are actually the exact opposite. So we have seen stronger integrations of the cells into the overall car. So if you look at Tesla's honeycomb design, it's cell to pack. So this makes second life much more difficult, if not impossible. At the same time, when I started my PhD, I looked a lot into vehicle to grid, which is basically a second life that's parallel to the first one and not after it. So you use the battery for while it's connected to the grid to do some frequency reserve or whatever. And at the time, the gold standard for cycle performance of a battery was about 5,000 cycles. So that was, German companies trying to throw the best of the best to make it expensive so they can sell it's not worth doing it, it's too expensive. Yeah. But anyways, at the time we had batteries that could do 4,000 or 5,000 full cycles. You're never going to be able to use them in a car life ever. That's like millions of miles. And now, since costs have become crucial to surviving as a EV manufacturer, they had to, cut corners or to optimize, if you will. And we've seen that from about 4,000 or 5,000 full cycles that a battery could do in 2014, 15. We've gone down to 800 cycles. So the quality, quote unquote, actually has gotten much worse. So the car manufacturers, they optimize for their use case, for their only one use case that they worry about. And, adding any quality to the battery that goes to someone else, for them, it's unnecessary costs. So the question, is really how can we align the interests of the makers of the battery with a circular use? And at the moment, I have to say, I think this is not aligned very well, because if you only look at the first life of a battery, there might be some quite cheap things you could do that have a huge impact down the line, which are today not done because it's kind of not their business at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Still comes down to whose responsibility and what every player should be expected to do. I think we have maybe a few minutes for one last question. And thank you, Zola, for responding to the questions directly in the chat box. And I encourage everyone to join our Slack channel. We can keep the discussion going there. So let's take the last question. There's a question about ownership models, but William addressed it like in the previous Q&A, but the last one about analytics again. How does this data integrate with standard AI platforms that analyze C&I solar PV systems? And I think it's specifically to Acure, if your products work well with analyzing data from multiple renewable power sources, for instance, in megawatt scale hybrid energy projects.
Yeah, I can keep that short. So we focus on analyzing battery data, and it's kind of a parallel process. Integrating it through an API is relatively simple, and yeah, enough about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And that keeps us, on time for concluding the panel. I would like to thank you all for making the time. Thank you so much to the panelists for your interesting views and insights on your work. And congratulations so much for what you're doing in the industry and all your effort to actually bring second life batteries to life. Something the world really needs to be able to address this battery waste and potential hazard that could come from it if you don't really think about it from the start off. So we just posted again our EIN links if you want to keep up with our work, and if you want to join the Slack channel to keep the conversation going there. We apologize for not taking all the questions. We try to go as many as we can, but that's all time we have for the session. So thank you everyone who joined. Thank you again for the panelists. If you want to have like a final word, you can go on, and I'll see you around in the small cycle of battery players. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank
This
you
is
for
very
hosting.
valuable to everyone.
Thank you. And everyone should be looking out on their email. We follow up with, as I said, like a recording and a questionnaire for feedback on what's your thoughts on the panel. So thank you, and we thank you in advance for taking part on the survey.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.